everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I want to dye some yarn that is variegated with a softness of it. Maybe it'll be a little bit pastel to medium toned. I don't want it too pastel, but I'm not going for something dark and saturated today. What I'm going for is an effect similar to what I created in a recent episode of Dyepot PS, the series that the ChemKnits patrons get early access to. And on the base layer, I took a bunch of dyes. Honestly, the dyes I'm diluting, I didn't know the concentration that I mixed them at. But I'm diluting them further to pour it onto the yarn and work it through, even though the colors were striking really fast without no acid. And so that is what I'm going for today. And we'll be using some of those colors that I mentioned. The three colors that I have already mixed are Dharma acid dyes Lilac, Alpine Blue, and Baby Blue Eyes. I used up all the Valentine blush that I showed in that particular short. And so we're going to use those colors. Maybe I'll bring in some other colors from the dye stocks that I have, and we're going to play. Now, one thing that could make things a little different from what we have before is that with blues and purples, the blend is going to be different than doing a pink and a blue, which gives like a lilac blend. But I'm hoping to still get a lot of dimension and soft shifts of color. So let's go play. The yarn we're going to dye today is Knit Pick Stroll Fingering Weight yarn. This yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. And I'm going to go ahead and add zip ties and pre-soak it for at least 15 minutes. This yarn is very absorbent, so it does not need a long pre-soak. This is my 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan. And I'm bringing over our 300 grams of yarn that is sopping wet. I'm not going to add more water to it yet because we're going to be adding water with our dyes, and if I start with too much water, then the dyes won't really be able to stick that easily. All right, I'm gonna go pop on gloves and bring our dyes over. Okay, and the way I'm gonna do this is take some water into this cup, and I'm gonna grab some lilac, pour it in to dilute the dyes a bit further. It's okay that I have not really stirred it up. Now, one thing I was curious to see as I pour this on, and I'm gonna go in random ways, but one of the things I was curious about was whether or not I would see breaking right away. And color breaking is when you see a color split into the components that make it. So lilac splits with pinks and blues. And I think this one might be the Alpine Blue, but I don't know. And I'm going to be adding it on. There's elements of this that are like that scribble dyeing technique I love, but because our dyes are way less concentrated, it's going to bring a softness in as we continue to do this and layer the colors. And I'll do a little more lilac right now, just so that way you can see that even if I go across the purple, there's a chance that we can layer dimensionally these colors a bit. That did not go out the way I wanted it to. And I think will be just really nice if we keep building this. I don't have very much of these blues though. I am starting to run low. But I like the way that these colors are layering on top of each other. Okay, what I'm gonna do now is, even though I don't have a full coverage over here yet, I'm gonna flip our yarn over. And you can see just from the color of the liquid that these dyes aren't going all the way through the yarn. We have a lot of whites left. And yeah, this is the way I'm gonna be layering the color. Now, my tap water is slightly acidic, which is how I'm able to get away with not having acid in here yet. But I do think I'm gonna bring over one or two other colors. Okay, I have a little bit of some Paradise Fibers Blue. This one is a 1% stock solution that I am going to dilute before we dilute it further. Okay, I'm gonna get some water. I think this is one of the old blues that I didn't really use. And it's fun to just, ooh, that's really pretty, splash the colors on. And I just really enjoyed this effect. Okay, this is the new blue that I brought over. I wonder what would happen if I were to do this, this overall technique with just a single color and just continue to build it up. That I don't know. At some point I will, and I'm going for a little bit more of our lilac. At some point I will add some more acid into here, because as our volume of water increases, the dyes are not going to start sticking quite as much. But you can see they are really staying put rather well for now. Okay, I am going to refill this with water. It's 500 milliliters, and I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar to it. The dyes are doing a good job of not going too far in. The lilac is also pink enough that we're getting a lot of dimension in here with the blues, and so I am happy with that. But I don't want too much. There. I need to keep an eye on things because we don't want to go like too fast and not let the colors bind. I am enjoying this overall effect so much. Okay, this is the last of one of those original blues, either the Baby Blue Eyes or the Alpine Blue. And this is the other reason why I flip things over. This is the other last bit of the blue. This is the other reason why I flip things over before I kept adding the color, because just for balance, I didn't want all of one blue on one side. I wanted to layer and play. And yes, there is some element of alternating colors, but you can see the softness that we get that is different from some of the scribble dyeing techniques that I do. Okay, so now, this time as I flip, I'm trying to open and expose parts of the yarn that maybe were on the bottom, that maybe don't have as much color. You can see that we're gonna have a lot of white, or sometimes it's a bit of an undefined color, and I just call it pastel. In a listing, it's like on a pastel base, because sometimes it is a little bit undefinable. But I'm looking for those areas of uninterrupted color, and that is what I'm going to focus on a bit as I bring the color in, both randomly. I'm going to add some of our blue. That might be a little too concentrated. Maybe. Maybe a bit. That's okay. We'll go for it over here. We'll grab a tiny bit more water. I mean, I have a whole container of water, but I want to spread it out. I'm still amazed with how quickly some of these colors are striking onto the yarn. And at some point there will probably be some amount of dye and color in solution as well. That is bound to happen, but see, here is another area where I'm feeling like, okay, I want more color there. Ooh, you know, at the beginning I said, oh, I don't know if this will be like pastel or medium toned. We really are going to have something pastel here, but it is so romantic feeling. Does that make sense? I've had other techniques that I've called watercolor colorways in the past. This is, oh dear, I overspilled. This is watercolor yarn, my friends. This is just like a soft, variegated explosion of color, and I'm just loving it. I mean, here I am, what, I guess it's 6 minutes in. I've probably cut some amounts out, but I'm just layering and playing and seeing who these colors want to be and leaning in, and I don't know, it's just so nice and fun because the more the colors stick, right, and the more you layer, you get them building on each other because they're not spreading all the way through. This is a reason why, and I've had this question, people have asked, oh, why don't you do your lasagna technique with liquid dyes? When I use liquid dyes, they tend to strike to the yarn a little faster, even without me adding acid. I've not counted how many times I've refilled my container, but this time I have 2 tablespoons of white vinegar in the 500 milliliters of water. But yeah, in my experience, liquid dyes either can be spread through really nicely and easily, or they are likely to stick and be more stuck. And so that is just the reality of what I end up seeing a lot. And so as I lay this down, and so the reason why this is important is that if I were to take a little bit of dye powder and sprinkle it on and then immediately start working it through, as the dye dissolves, it can't bind to the yarn until it dissolves, but then as it dissolves, I'm dissolving it and massaging it through the fibers, and I get a better spread than if I were, I get a better spread than if I were doing the liquid dyes like I am here, because I'm pouring them on and they are very much staying where I've placed them. Now at this point there's enough water that the colors may move through more, but we're just gonna be taking this last, oh dear, bit of lilac. Now we are currently on my kitchen counter. We will be moving this to the stove to heat set things, but I'm very happy because I'm successfully using up the colors that I've mixed. This is very full, plus some others, and so that is glorious. And we have a gorgeous yarn here. Now, this could work with more saturated colors, but not quite as well. Let me take this over to the stove and start heating it. This is so beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna start heating this up. And that last bit of water that I have, may as well add it. I'll check back in like 10 minutes, but let's hop in front of the camera so I can talk. One of the reasons why this technique worked as well as it did is that the colors were binding to the yarn pretty quickly. I wasn't sure about the lilac. I don't use it that much, but because the colors were sort of staying put and grabbing onto the yarn very quickly after I added them, this meant that I could build and move the yarn without spreading the colors over everything, getting this very short section of color but very related tonal. This is going to be a fantastic pastel, almost neutral leaning. It's really great. Now, if I was using more saturated colors instead of diluting the dyes, if I was pouring on straight 1% stock solutions, there's a chance that the colors would like stay put a little bit, but without applying heat, it would be hard to continually pour and add the colors and move. I would want to have heat present. And even so, there's a chance that the colors may spread all over a little bit more, which can be lovely and beautiful, just different, because cold, I think my house is 65 degrees right now because I have the heat off. But because my house is relatively cold, you wouldn't necessarily always expect colors to bind that fast. And not all of these are colors that I would say, oh, that's one that strikes super fast, it's great for glazing. But there have been times, and this was something I struggled with a lot, when I would want to create saturated colorways with saturated colors, and I would struggle with adding the liquid dyes onto the yarn because I'd hit a point where the yarn was really saturated, but there were color areas that needed more liquid, but I wasn't necessarily able to add more liquid without ruining the colorway. This is why thickeners like guar gum are fantastic, because you can kind of help things stay put. But this is a big reason why I switched to doing more direct dye powder application techniques. Because I've found that if I'm applying the dye powders directly onto the yarn, I can easily build up the color to where I want it without increasing the volume. So I can have a scenario where I can still flip the yarn and we're not gonna have like color bleeding and going into different sections in a way that I don't want. And so that is why this has worked out well for me in the past. Now, I will say that this is the kind of clip that's going to be really annoying for me to edit because, you know, a clip that is 10 minutes long, I don't know, if it's not a time lapse, that's something that I struggle with, but it's just so lovely to paint with the colors and play. And we could keep building this, and you could keep building this until you end up with a color that is more saturated. But the more you layer these colors on top of each other, the more even it'll become, the more blending you'll get. And so if you want to feel some of the differences between, okay, this area is very blue, this area is very purple, that is something else to consider. I suppose one other thing that's worth considering while I have your attention is that I used 3 different blues that are not vastly different, but are somewhat different. And that also is going to bring in some dimension just by the blues being slightly different in there and in different spots. So I don't want to discount that. If I was creating this with solely 2 colors, we would have dimension in there for sure. But sometimes when you're layering colors, whether it's speckles or something like this, sometimes having a couple colors that are pretty darn close to each other but not exactly the same can help give you that depth in your project. But let's go check back in on our yarn. It's been 10 minutes and I'm setting a timer for 20 more. The yarn looks fantastic. There are some colors that once you apply heat, they really bam and appear. And so I wasn't quite sure if all of a sudden we're gonna see super dark purple that felt unbalanced. But I'm loving it. Now this background here is one that I would call pastel, and I wouldn't be able to say too much more beyond that because it's not white. There is color there. It's a little bit more gray almost because it's like the off-white and the yellow got toned by a little bit of the blue or purple. But it's definitely not white. But anyway, I will see you in 20 minutes. I am in love. You know, these colors remind me of a dress that I have, a very flowy dress that I wore to a very dear friend's wedding. I'm in love, so much love. Okay, I'm gonna set this yarn aside so it can cool completely and then we can wash it. The yarn is mostly cool. Mostly. Oh, look at how soft and pretty those transitions are. You know, say what I will about my preference for using straight dye powder versus playing with liquid dyes because of control. It is so fun to have liquid dyes and then lean in to what they're doing. It almost makes it seem like it's shiny or something. Oh. Now, this was even though like it seemed to go pretty quickly, like 10 minutes hands-on doesn't seem so bad, it is still a fairly labor-intensive process for only 3 skeins. It is not something that I could scale up. There's some colorways where having 2 pans takes a similar amount of time as one, and I don't think that it would be super easy to scale up. I'm not saying that it's not scalable, but I think that this is conceivably a hard one for someone who wants to dye 100 skeins of yarn a day to do. That is all. So maybe I could do 2 pans at once, especially if I pre-diluted the dyes. But part of the fun of it is that the dyes are at different proportions each time. So anyway, I don't know. I'm gonna go ahead and take this to my spin dryer to remove more of the liquid, then we'll hang it up to dry. This yarn is so pretty. And I don't know if Editing Rebecca is gonna insert a picture. I don't think I have a good picture of me in the dress that this is making me think of. Oh man, I need to find that and wear that to something else, just randomly. But the watercolor effect. I am obsessed with all of the different blue and purple tones we have in here. And part of the depth is because we had 3 very similar but different blues, but also just the way they layered with that lilac color. Oh my gosh. I feel like earlier I talked about how this colorway would be harder to scale up. And to clarify a bit, this is a colorway where you're putting a lot of attention and constant movement and pouring of colors. And since things are very much done by feel, you could end up with some big differences between dye lots. Not just within one pan, there's probably differences here, but from batch to batch, because it is a little harder to do this exact same thing on 200, on like 2, 3, 4 different pans all at once. Not impossible, just a little bit trickier compared to some other colorways where we have more measurements. Now, this isn't a bad thing, and there's lots of colorways that are like this for me, and a lot of times if I'm dyeing 30, 40 skeins of a colorway, I'll say, gee, I got way more heavy-handed on day 2 when I was dyeing this. So this is something that can come up a lot. But I guess if you are planning on dyeing yarn for yourself, for say a sweater or something, I would try to do as many pans simultaneously as possible, just so that way you could keep things as consistent as you can. But I am absolutely obsessed. I mean, obsessed. I feel like this technique would be a good candidate for one of those like large under the bed storage containers, a huge plastic container where you can fit a lot of yarn in there all at once. That would be a lot easier to layer the colors and play, even though again there would be differences within there, than having multiple different pans. Because the colors strip fast enough that I absolutely could go and steam set this yarn when I'm done applying the color to set it. Now, there could be situations where that doesn't work as well, but the colors were striking pretty darn well, even without acid. You can see me processing information right now in real time, because one of the other things I'd love to do is play around with this using more saturated colors. But the more dye we add at any given point, the more the colors will spread. And so that is something also that needs some thought. But yeah, I guess this technique, which was inspired from another technique, has me super excited to play with liquid dyes again. Because I think one thing I used to do a lot with hand painted colors is I would have the yarn straight on my counter, I would have my liquid dyes, I'd apply it to the yarn, and then I wouldn't get the coverage that I wanted or the intensity that I wanted because the yarn would get too full of liquid. And so then I found out about thickeners like War Gum, which allowed me to add more pigment without adding a ton of liquid. And so that was something that was beneficial. But switching to a direct powder application helped me get that intensity of color I wanted without changing the water volume. But for things that are more random versus sort of intentionally placed, yeah, I am so excited. And I love when a technique just scratches an itch in my brain and has me so excited and happy to play more and more and more. And so I think I'll be doing a lot more of this summer. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And if there are color combinations you would like to see me play around with using this technique, please let me know down in the comments below. I do read comments very frequently and try to screenshot suggestions, and then I'll go back and look through all of those at times when I'm wanting to draw inspiration. So I really appreciate all of your suggestions and feedback. Thank you so much for watching.